And we are live. Most fearful topic of the great debate is not the atheist versus theist, in my opinion. If anything, that's kind of mundane these days. I think the more heated debate that everybody wants to avoid, which is why I like diving headfirst in, is Jesus the Messiah? I'm here with Wayman, and a very learned man, and hasn't succumbed to the religious temptation, have you, sir?
No.
Kept yourself pretty clear of that.
Yeah, I kind of came out of it, and I love the freedom. And I really haven't, even though I like studying and lean more towards the Jewish idea of things, I'm still kind of free in that area too. So, you know, kind of like roaming around in different areas and enjoy that very much, because I end up learning a lot about different things and how it all fits together.
We love freedom. Freedom is so nice. If you're a nice guy, you'll do all right, believe it or not. That's kind of freeing, in my opinion. So I take it you're not. With that, I can pretty much easily say you're not real convinced that Jesus is the Messiah.
No, mainly because like the Jewish response to that, and this is why I like Judaism, because it ends up being a response to evangelicalism, and it works perfectly because they studied almost everything they can on the Jewish side, where Christianity and evangelicals a lot of times fail to do that. You'll very few Christians in the evangelical movement who push the idea, or Protestant groups and Christian groups, multi-denominational, what have you. They know about Josephus and Jewish history and things, but they don't delve into it like maybe the early church fathers did, and read the Talmud and read different things and pick things out of there, place it in history to get a really good historical context, and then take all of that and place it into what the motivation of the New Testament writers were trying to do. So I think with all of that, Christology was built from day one. And they built it in such a way where the end justifies the means. So however they got it done, and it's still being built today. So every time a minister stands up and expounds on New Testament texts, whether it's from Johnnian theology, Pauline theology, ideas from, say, Matthew or Mark or whatnot, Coptic Christians, it ends up being expounded on, and new things are added to the body of Christ all the time, composing it of all these little bits and parts.
It evolves, doesn't it?
Yes, continually. And it's amazing to see that evolution happen from, say, the writings of Josephus and what they thought, all the way up. Church fathers were very frustrated with Josephus because what they found in there was that mainly Josephus believed that the temple was destroyed due to the killing of James the Just, the temple priest, who was, well, they say it was brother Jesus, but he was viewed at that time, even by Josephus, even without the Christian editing, because the Christian editing, when you're reading Josephus, comes in, and it says, who is the brother of the Christ? So you scratch that out, right? Because we know that was probably edited. James the Just was looked on very highly by the Jewish people because he took care of the poor and the sick. And there was a time when the Zealots took over the temple before the Roman invasion. There was an intermittent period between, I'm not sure who it was exactly, Felix maybe, who was leaving, and another governor was coming in. And two people, Ananias and one of his cohorts, called bet in the 70, and he rigged it so James the Just would be executed. And Josephus talks about this. Then he talks about the killings of those two priests for killing James the Just. And he ends it and implies heavily that the destruction of Jerusalem happened because of the killing of James the Just. And even the Roman governors were upset about how that went down. So the problem was, here you had things being changed in early church documents. Later looked back at Judaism and made that to be Christ, because they were kind of upset with Josephus on why he would end it that way, when the real meaning is, why wasn't it Christ that brought about the end of the
Did you just
temple?
say that
So I think that
the New Testament Christ looked like the Messiah?
The real idea of the end and the apocalyptic events are more or less found in Dead Sea Scrolls. What happened was, you had a certain sect of Judaism who would not put up with temple impurity. And so they went out to Damascus and formed their own, because the corruption in the temple and the high priesthood was fierce. They were installed by Greeks and Greco-Roman governors. They were not true high priests, so they could control the temple and Jerusalem and Judaism politically. So the War Scroll explains how it's kind of like the revelation of Judaism, kind of, how they expected the heavenly host to come back and help them in the end, and how they were still to keep the clean and unclean separated and not allow impurity to come into the temple.
So what you're saying is there's a link between the Pharisees, or the ruling bodies, the priests of the temple, and the Roman government as well. Is
correct.
That right? Okay.
And one of the biggest problems with that, they were accepting gifts from Gentiles into the temple. They were accepting sacrifices from Gentiles into the temple, which they were not allowed to do, because it was a form of impurity. So what happened?
They were bringing unkosher stuff.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah.
And it would create this.
We'll take anything. We're desperate, kind of a.
Right. So it's kind of like money and politics. They were using the money and the gifts to influence the politics of the temple.
Okay.
So when the Jewish War happened, these people from Damascus, the Essenes, and others with them, very warlike. These guys were not peaceful at all. Came to help, but it was no good by that point, because they were also wiped out. But their text in the War Scroll and community rule very much explained what it needed to be around that time period on how to be pure. And they believed that a Messiah would come as long as they kept pure, kind of like we see today, and angels would be among them to help them fight this war. And they didn't show up, and it was just massacre. But it's an answer back to evangelicalism, also about why all this stuff didn't come to be. They were not mistaken. They were not mistaken at all about it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, let me turn this mic off so I don't get feedback, right?
Did you say that the New Testament was written for the purpose of making the Old Testament prophecies look like they had been fulfilled? To make Jesus Christ look like the Messiah? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, do you have a shred of evidence for that, except your connect the dots ideas in your head?
Yes, I do. Because
okay, could you tell me
pesher,
what that is, please?
it's called pesher. It's called an interpretation of text, and the Dead Sea Scrolls community have used it for years to bring about prophecy using the Hebrew words. There's
You
a
do know
pesher of
that,
Habakkuk to explain what the prophets were saying in light of current events. So
did
they
you
would
know
have the
that
text, and they would write underneath it what their prophecy would be on it, using Hebrew verbiage. So there's a pesher of Psalms, there's pesher of Habakkuk. You can look all this up. It's
okay, so
amazing to read.
who
So
wrote
people have
these?
been doing this for years.
Okay,
It's nothing new.
okay, so who did this exactly?
We don't know who wrote the Gospels. I know.
No, not the Gospels. These connect the dots idea documents he's talking about. Who wrote them?
The Essene community, the ones who wanted temple purity and went into Damascus, these are found in Dead Sea Scrolls. The pesher of Habakkuk and the pesher of Psalm 37.
And these texts show what exactly that in them that shows that the New Testament was written to make Jesus look like the Messiah?
The technique was used to show that past texts can explain, in some ways, that they believed current events, which is what the whole of the New Testament did, especially Matthew.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. I want to understand what you're saying, because I think it's a big pile of stinking hawk. And so you're saying that somebody wrote the members of the Essene community. I can prove that it is, by the way. Members of the Essene community wrote ideas in documents about current events that they were saying seems to be a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct. And it's been done for years.
How does that make it look like the New Testament is written to fulfill the
because it was a form of technique. It was called pesher. If you look up the definition of pesher and what that is.
Yeah, but how does that demonstrate that the documents we call the New Testament were written for the purpose of making it look like Jesus was the fulfillment, the Messiah of the Old Testament?
Because they were using pesher of Isaiah and especially Matthew in the examples that he uses, trying to show Jesus as possibly the new Moses. And fulfillment of prophecy, every single one is pesher using Old Testament literature to do it, and it was a technique. It's called pesher.
Matthew, you said Matthew wrote that Jesus might have been the new Moses.
Well, he has him appear that way, definitely. Sermon on the Mount. He's transfigured with Moses and Elijah.
I don't know. I don't see these connecting.
I don't expect you to know.
How does somebody?
I'm not asking you to.
Yeah, I don't, because it's not based
right.
on. How it is that Matthew wrote what Jesus said. Okay, he wrote down what Jesus said. I don't see anything in the text that alludes that Matthew thought that Jesus was another Moses in some way. Can you show me the text in Matthew that indicates that, please?
Well, he had the Sermon on the Mount. He's sitting on the Mount. He's given Beatitudes, and he has the Mount of Transfiguration where he's up there with Moses. And
so Moses didn't do any of that.
To be greater than Moses.
Moses didn't do any of that, though.
So they appear to have Christ be a lawgiver. So as things progress,
no, the New Testament doesn't say
definitely
Jesus
using pesher to
is the embodiment of the law, not the lawgiver.
The Old Testament, and they didn't stop.
Wait, you made a mistake. You said Jesus is the lawgiver of the New Testament. The New Testament doesn't state that. It says he is the embodiment of the law. See, it does not say that he is the new lawgiver, so that's error number one.
That might be splitting hairs.
No, that's not.
Okay.
There's no passage in the text that says Jesus gave law.
I think there's one way we can look at that I think is interesting is how Matthew and Mark both have Jesus riding in a town on a donkey. Well, I think it was Matthew has him on 2, and Mark has him on 1.
No, he didn't have him on 2. It says, if you read the passage carefully, it says, they put the clothing on these donkeys and set him thereupon. What did they put Jesus on? The clothes, not 2 donkeys.
Right, but it took donkeys plural, and yet Mark has them as 1. And there's a passage.
So how does that mean? Boy, now you're talking about splitting hairs. So this indicates, now we're supposed to believe Jesus, that the Matthew is trying to allude that Jesus is a new Moses? What, please?
Prophet. Well, Elijah anyway, definitely.
You know why people put together these ridiculous paint the dots, connect the dots, ridiculous, without a scrap of evidence, all in your head theories? It's because they refuse to acknowledge that Jesus Christ is who he says he was and did what he says he did. That's all it is. You guys are willing to believe and look for anything to explain away Jesus Christ is not the Messiah, except the truth. And that's why I'm not your judge, but that's why you'll go to the lake of fire if you don't change what you believe. Jesus Christ said,
the reason why we do that, the reason why we do that is because the previous methods that we've been given
if somebody was trying
are
to
completely unreliable. I mean, I want to know the truth just like you do.
If Jesus was, if Matthew was somebody trying to write that
your
Jesus
technique
was a new Moses,
that you use isn't completely reliable. So what I'm going to do is read.
No, listen when I was speaking. Let me finish, sir. I was speaking.
Passurism is a theory.
I was asking
most clearly spelled out in the Habakkuk Passion.
My question was, if they were trying to make Moses
that God has written to be known as a righteous teacher. So they're generally considered two types of Passurism. Continuous Passurism, where they take the book of the Hebrew Bible, often from the prophets, to quote it phrase by phrase, quotation, insert, and interpretation. The second type is the thematic Passurism. Use the same method, but where the author brings together passages from different biblical texts to develop a theme.
Yeah.
Examples of the latter.
No support for all that. It's just in your head. So here's the question I have for
Pressure
you.
was an important part
here's the question I have for you. If these people were trying to make Jesus look like a new Messiah,
did not use their own text to explain what was going on in current events, definitely.
Okay. So here's a question I'm going to ask you.
And the technique has been used for years.
Yeah, I don't care about people's concocted techniques. What I want to ask you is a question.
So you wouldn't care about the theories or the means by which we come at
I'm trying to ask you a question for 4 minutes now.
So I think
Matthew,
Mark, and Luke definitely repeated what Judaism has been doing for years.
You'll either answer my
and
question
teaching on the laws. So also, Midrash and Agadah is definitely
I'll be back
part of the storytelling.
I can ask a question.
So I think that the bottom line is they use these techniques, and they definitely copied it into believing definitely that they believe Christ was. Dead Sea Scrolls believe that the teacher of righteousness was, and they use the same exact techniques.
Okay, so now my question to you is, if the Testament, if the authors of the New Testament were trying to make Jesus look like a new Moses and a lawgiver and not the embodiment of the law, why do they say instead that he is the embodiment of the law and not giving any law? Why do they have Jesus quoted as saying that he didn't come to give law, he came to fulfill it instead? First question number one. You can't answer that. You can't.
I most certainly can.
No, it blows your whole idea clean out of the water.
No, not at all. It adds to it.
Second, I have another question. I'm not done. Now,
let's go with this question first. Hang on.
Let me ask another question. Here's another. If that was the case, why did Jesus say so many things that testify against what you're saying? For example, Jesus said, as I pointed out, that he did not come to fulfill, give law, but he came to fulfill the law. Okay, why did, if that were so, Moses taught strict adherence to the law, Jesus taught grace. Okay, very different. You see, this alone takes your everything that all this connect the dots stuff in your head and throws it completely away. A 10th grader who's actually read and understood the gospel of Jesus Christ would listen to you, and if he wasn't looking for a reason to deny Jesus Christ, he would say you're an idiot. And
well, I think that since we both want the truth, we should deny Jesus.
The truth, friend.
Because
a lake of fire awaits you.
Because definitely, I would look for reasons where it would not be true to prove that it's true.
Oh,
I mean, you'd be definitely in big trouble if everything you took for granted was absolutely true and you didn't have any way of testing that. Like, why would you do that? So Jesus is shown as being even stricter than the law, because he says, the law commands you that, allows you for divorce. But I say, if you look at a woman and lust after her, so he made the law more strict in some areas. It says if you hate your brother, whatever. I can't remember the exact, but he says, I say, if you have evil thoughts to your brother, you say something, committed murder against him already by saying Raka to your brother. So there it shows him reinforcing the law. So they may have seen him as this type of fulfillment, but then mixed in with Pauline theology, all these texts take on a whole different picture. Dead Sea Scrolls were definite answer to Pauline theology. They disliked it because they seen it coming in.
Yeah, and they tried to suppress it, or else
they wrote against it. You cannot mix clean with unclean. You cannot have food sacrificed to idols. James the Just did not allow that. You cannot come in being non-circumcised. That's why James the Just made Paul be circumcised in Timothy, and that's why he got in a fight with Peter about it, because they were saying, oh, hey, Paul's saying, hey, buddy, you don't need to circumcise. So there's a huge problem with that. James says, yes, you do. And the reason why Paul was beat, because he was all things to all people. And if you look up that verse where Paul's all things to all people, to the Jew, he's the Jew. To the Gentile, he's the Gentile. So these people were following him around. And what would I think if I seen Paul, who's supposed to be a law-abiding Jewish person, appear to be a Gentile? He's a hypocrite. Since he broke the law, he's impure. He cannot go into the temple. And that's why when James and the early church brought him back, they said, we want to see, and we want you to prove to our Jewish followers that you are, in fact, still Jewish. And they made him take the Nazirite vow, shave his head, and that's when the Jews, they couldn't deal with it. Took him out, dragged him out, gave him a good beating because he defamed the temple. Luckily, they didn't kill him because the zeal, who was that we read about in Torah study where they brought the foreign woman into the tent and they had a spear thrown through him? So that kind of stuff was still remembered. So Paul goes on his mission trip to the Gentiles because they don't want anything to do with him after that. Unfortunately, James the Just was killed. Church of Jerusalem destroyed. Paul wins. His theology wins because the writings were left over. And that's how so much of it was influenced in what we have today in modern Christianity, which is pretty much wiped out. Also, another big topic is doing, not grace, but also doing, not faith, but also doing.
Yeah.
James was huge in the doing.
Yes, he was.
So, in the book of Acts, this is why it's important for people to read the Bible, even evangelicals. 6:2, it talks about how Greek Jews weren't being widows, weren't being fed along with Hebrew widows during the food handouts. And the apostles got together and they said, oh, we need to do something about this. But it's more important for us to preach than to wait on tables. And to me, that just underlined it right there. We would rather preach than do. And if you're not doing the law, if you're not following it, it's no good at all. Faith without works is dead. And, just believing and getting off. Now I sound like a minister, but, that's how I think about it. And after reading the scrolls, if you have not, I would encourage you to get Dead Sea Scrolls by Michael Wise, New Translation. Read through that and think about it pertaining to the early church. Get some of Eisenman's books on James the Just. He's a little out there, but he really taught me, even though I don't agree 100% with him, how important the scrolls were in this time period in retaliation to some of the stuff that was going on. And also the writings of Josephus. He was Roman, but he also winked at Judaism and really cared about them in some ways, even though he was writing for a Roman audience. So he can't totally be trusted, but that's the best we got. And at some points where he deals with Temple, he's still held dear to his heart, and he's very honest about it. And there's a lot of stuff in there that's pretty amazing. So I don't know if this would end the discussion, but I got work in the morning. Sorry, Neff had to leave, but I'm sure I'll watch this later, hopefully.
No, Neff took
sorry
off
that
a
whole
long
thing.
time ago. Neff chickened out.
Maybe somebody else will come in. I don't know. I feel kind of bad, but I gotta take off. So
Wayman, thanks for stopping by. It's always good to listen. And I look forward to our next meeting. Have a good night and make a lot of money tomorrow. Good work.
Yep.
Be prosperous. And that's just about going to do it for us here. No, we'll try and give it another time. I might as well respond to what Wayman was saying while we might wait for people to come in if anybody happens to be watching. I know people are watching, and it's not showing up here in the it's not showing up here. It's not showing up on my wall that there's ever even a conversation going on this Hangout. I've got some really bad Google problems. Google's got a long way to go. If you're listening out there, Google Firefox, hello, talk about security. But there's one thing that Gretchen is a squirrel wanted to confront Neffy with before Neffy left, and that is that in John Christ saw a new command. This is her words. That in John Christ saw a new commandment I give to you, that you would love one another. And he left before she could get that to me and get it out there. Yeah, Neff, you just kind of left, and that's a shame that you took off like that. That was not nice. But anyway, for those of you who are listening, and thank you, Gretchen, for that question. Like I say, my viewer count doesn't show anything, but if you are listening, my particular response is not only it's not that I'm splitting hairs about the two donkeys, but it's been made pretty clear to me recently that was a mistranslation. Or one of them, either Mark or Matthew, is a mistranslation of what happened with Elijah. As far as writing it on two donkeys or one donkey, it's just more evidence showing that the New Testament was constructed around the idea of Messiah at the time. It wasn't that he fulfilled anything, because there's too much in the prophets. Every time a Christian fellow will go to the Old Testament, it's like, don't do that. Don't show your snakes to Moses. Moses' snake will gobble them. You're going to lose your staff, and you're going to walk around with a limp all day, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? You don't do that, because as soon as you go to the Hebrew Bible, it's next. It gobbles up the Christian claim, and that's the shame of it. So anyway, we got a few good 20 minutes in here on this Hangout. Not too shabby on a spur of the moment, bada boom. Let's see if we can get a hangout in here. We had a couple people show up. It's a shame Neffy couldn't shut up and listen to what anybody else was saying, because Alfred's got some really good points, and Alfred Alfred comes from a kind of a different area than I go. When it comes to approaching this subject. He's actually looked into the history. He's actually been able to piece together history for at least 100, 200 years of this story that we talk about in places that the New Testament will never go. I always go with the Torah route, because that's where my head is, So, and either way, both way, whether it's historically or biblically, it doesn't add up. Jesus will never add up. It's not that Christians, we want to shame you and degrade you and turn you into something you're not, but we have to realize that there is a difference between the man who's trying to show you heaven and the man who you believe is your link to heaven. There's two completely different things. It's a shame we didn't get more folks in here. All right. I'm not going to talk to myself. I could talk all flipping night long, and that just wouldn't pass for a good television, good presentation. So, Gretchen, thanks again for tuning in, and thanks for your contribution. Wayman, once again, thank you for coming in. Neffy, thank you for coming in as well. Too bad you couldn't stomach it. James, the Idol Smasher, I'm out of here. Hopefully we'll do this again sometime. Adios, amigos.